HOCs versus custom hooks versus render props. Which pattern should you pick for reusing component logic? And when might you still pick an older pattern? On this slide, we introduce all three. A higher order component is a function that wraps another component and adds props or behavior. A custom hook is a reusable function that returns data and actions a component can use. A render prop is a component that calls a provided function with data so you decide how to render. Each one reuses logic, but they do it in different ways. Here's the custom hook example called useCounter. In plain English, the code does this. Create a piece of state called count, starting from a given initial number, and provide a function called countIncrement that sets count to the previous count plus 1. The hook returns both the current count and the increment function. In short, a custom hook packages up state and behavior as a reusable recipe you can call from any functional component, and it doesn't add wrapper components to your tree. Next is the HOC example with counter. In plain English, it returns a new component that, when rendered, creates its own internal count state and passes that count and an increment function down to the wrapped component as props. Use an HOC when you want to decorate or enhance an existing component. Especially useful if you must support class components or if you need to inject props at the component boundary. The downside is HOCs add wrapper layers around components, which can make debugging and prop tracing a bit more complex. Finally, the render prop example. Data provider takes children as a function, holds some data in state, and calls that children function with the data. In plain English, the provider fetches or computes data, then asks the consumer to render however it wants using that data. Render props give the consumer explicit control over rendering. Use them when the caller should decide exact render structure. They can become verbose if overused, but they shine when you need dynamic children rendering that depends on internal logic. Quick decision rules. If you're writing new functional code with stateful logic, use custom hooks. They're simple, composable, and don't wrap your components. If you need to enhance or decorate class components or a wrapper API, pick an HOC. If the consumer must control how the UI is rendered with the provided data, use a render prop. The takeaway: hooks are the default today, but HOCs and render props remain useful for compatibility or when you need explicit rendering control. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications